And why should you listen to me? So my name is Jessica. I am an entrepreneur. I own a nightclub. I have owned past previous businesses from like hot dog carts and smoothie shops, and I used to sell teddy bears and roses in bars. I sold Avon when I was 14. I've kind of done a little bit of everything. I've done lots of startups. I've been in the industrial side as well. So I was a medic as well as a laborer. So I worked shutdowns in different plants. I worked on rigs, I dug ditch, I mined, I paved, I ran equipment. I worked in a slaughterhouse for a year and a half. What else have I done? Oh my God, I've done a ton of stuff. Tons of stuff. And then once I actually got into the nightclub business, that's when really things started to click and I really started to understand business itself. I kind of had this like fight or flight response with all of my other businesses. And once I got into the nightclub business, because it actually was, a large investment of time and money, and my reputation was on the line. That was kind of a big thing when you're stuck in ego. So that's when I really honed in on, learning as much as I could about business itself. So that's kind of what I want to convey to you guys, is that I'm not somebody that just showed up online and learn how to make ads and just started crushing it. It didn't work like that. It was kind of a long, steady process throughout my life. So we're definitely going to talk about my story and where I come from. So we're going to go way back. So get ready, sit down. It's going to be a good time. I've got some pretty great stories. So I was born super humble beginnings. My parents had a really crappy relationship with money. And when I say crappy relationship with money, they actually had a lot. Not a lot of money, but they worked really hard. They had a lot of assets. They did what they were supposed to do. They invested. I mean, in the 80s, interest rates on houses were like 18, 19, 20%. And they had multiple rentals. Now, that being said, we lived in this little tiny shitbox trailer. Like, I'm not even kidding you guys. I own an RV, like a travel trailer, a pull travel trailer. My travel trailer is bigger than the little shitbox trailer that we lived in. Yeah. I was so horrified and so embarrassed, and they would never buy like new cars. They never, ever. They were just saving for retirement, and oh my God. And they were like in their early 20s. My mom had me when she was 17, right? And they were like this from the get-go, right? My dad was, I think, 19, 20. Anyways, so I was always like, whatever. When it came to money, I've always been like, whatever. Now, people like to say that that's because I was spoiled. I like to say, well, not necessarily that I was spoiled. My parents made really good decisions when it came to investments, and I was the only child, so nothing had to be split up. However, I also learned at a really early age how to sell. Because my parents were so frugal, I had to learn how to sell everything. I recall being in a dress store. I wanted a dress when I was like 5. I wanted a big, pretty princess dress for a wedding. I wasn't in the wedding. However, I believed I deserved an amazing dress. I remember the dress was $59.99. I remember being in that store from the time I got off school at 2:30, I believe, until they closed. Because my dad convinced me that I had to convince the lady to sell it to me for $30. I needed to get it for half price. And I wouldn't give up. I stayed in that store. She would not give it to me. I left that store. I made my dad bring me back down there on the Saturday. And guess who got the dress for $30? This girl at 5. So from a very early age, and I mean, that's something that he taught me to do. He taught me to sell. I mean, for his own entertainment, obviously. He thought it was hilarious. But I had to do that all the time. Whenever I wanted anything, I had to sell, which is an amazing thing that I've actually introduced to my kids. And people go, you give them everything. I'm like, yeah, but I'm teaching them a valuable lesson. They're selling me, right? They're giving me logical reasons and stopping me from my emotional objections, right? So it's a very valuable lesson, and I'm glad I learned that. Now, however, throughout the course of my childhood, well into my 20s, I went through extreme amounts of trauma, like extreme. I know a lot of people have a lot of sad stories. I'm not going to get into all of them, but pretty much anything that could happen to a little girl happened. Raped, beaten, held against my will, people, dead people on top of me, like, oh my God, I can't even. Extremely bullied, which was funny because I was not the type that would be bullied, right? Like I was, an extreme athlete. I was like class president. But I was bullied just by other girls, kind of quietly, and more so my friends as opposed to, people out there bullying me. Anyways, so I was really depressed in high school. I was misdiagnosed with having depression because I wasn't actually really depressed. I had massive hormone issues, imbalances. So I went through all different sorts of stages where at one point when I was 12 years old, I was locked into a rubber room because I've always had this thought in my head that we're not getting out here alive, just live your life. I always have had that thought. And I remember going to the hospital and the ER, not nurse, but the doctor, it was a female, and she was like, she thought I was depressed. I'm like, I'm not depressed. Like, because of my spikes, I would when I was PMSing, I'd go completely mental. Anyways, so what happened was, long story short, she asked me about life and living and that sort of thing. And I was like, well, we're all going to die, right? Really shitty attitude, 12-year-old girl. And anyways, eventually, so she locked me up in the rubber room, which was absolutely awful. I ultimately ended up with some PTSD. My doctor, when he came back from holidays, came in. I was on the floor. I had no clothes on. There was a pad on the ground. No clothes, no nothing, totally locked. I couldn't see anyone. I couldn't talk to anybody. They would barely bring me food because I was so volatile, but I was fucking like a caged animal at 12 years old. I didn't know what happened. My parents didn't know what to do. They just went with it. So suffered from PTSD from that. From then and there, that's when things started to go downhill. I suffered back and forth with my mom and her boyfriends and whatever. I mean, it's all in the past, not bothering me anymore. However, the point of me telling you this is that I have pushed through adversity like a fucking champion. And that's why I get to lead and have such amazing people in my life that help me lead and help me teach people to win. Okay. As we move forward in my life, like I said, I started to have companies throughout my teenage years. My first real one that I made real money with was I moved to Alberta when I was 17. I left home actually when I was 15. I think I went back just before I went to Alberta when I was 17. But anyways, I moved to Alberta. I was managing Panagopolis, which is now known as Panago, and from there I jumped into the bar scene. Obviously, I was 18, and then I was like, "Whoa! I wonder what that chick's doing." She was selling teddy bears and roses, and I was like, "Whoa, that looks pretty lucrative." So a girlfriend of mine hooked me up with her. And so I kind of started working for her, and as any good entrepreneur does, they just replicate the model. So basically what I did is I was working for her, and she wasn't very nice to me, and she ripped me off all the time. So I just kindly went in and went behind her back and got all the contracts for the strip bars because that's where I made the most money, and I was done by 9 o'clock, and then I could have my night. So I was 18 then. Anyway, so I did that. Not super healthy to be making that kind of money and that kind of freedom when you have such a troubled past and that sort. So anyway, so then I started to get into drugs and alcohol. Well, I was already in alcohol, but I started to get into drugs. So I started to do a ton of drugs all the time. I got really, really, really sick. I ended up with a bleeding ulcer. And my mom actually, in my hometown, ended up getting stage 4 breast cancer, so I had to move home. So I moved home. And I worked in a pub there, continued on this horrible, awful, rocky, addicted to drugs and drinking, partying all the time, sleep all day, did that for a long time. And then I met my husband. Wow. So guess what you attract when you're in that sort of a dark space? Well, you attract that dark space. So, he's a fabulous man. However, he had major addiction issues as well. And long story short, he you know, after numerous times. We had a gym and a smoothie bar and all sorts of things going on that were positive. However, he just couldn't get out of the scene. And so I moved him away, and he hadn't worked in years because he was in the scene, and he just really felt really shitty about himself. And I'd always worked full time. I guess I was a functioning drug addict, I guess is kind of what they say. Anyways, and so one morning I got up in the morning, and he was still up, and he was awake, and he was doing drugs, and I was just over it, and I smacked him. And I just was like, get away from me. I'm over this. And so anyways, I left. And I had forgot my phone. I left to go to work in the morning. It was about 8:30. I came back in, and I could hear choking. And I came downstairs, and there he was hanging. And so, thank God that, you know, I have this crazy intuition. But yeah, I was able to lift him up a little bit. I couldn't enough. His body weight was too much. He was over 200 pounds. I had to literally drop him and let him hang more, go upstairs, get a knife, and cut him down, revive him, and bring him to the hospital. Again, I suffered from a ton of PTSD from that. So again, the reason I'm telling you guys this stuff, and I mean there's lots of other dark stuff too, is because I want you to know that all of this stuff is part of my story and is part of what I've used to leverage. So I've leveraged my pain into something beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And I'm going to teach you guys, whether you've had these sorts of ups and downs in your life or not, I'm going to teach you how to do that. Okay, so fast forward again. So I've got a couple of wonderful children. I started a nightclub when I was 30. I was 30. So I started a nightclub when I was 30, and that was doing really well. I started it with my mother as my partner, and eventually I started going down this kind of spiritual path where I was like, whoa, like I've got some heavy shit that I need to deal with, like big time. And so I started, you know, seeing shamans and like changing all sorts of things, reading lots of books, going down this amazing path. I kind of dabbled in it a little bit, you know, a couple years leading up to it, pretty much just to function. Like basically after my husband hung himself, I was fucked. I was a mess. I sat like this and rocked in a chair for 2 months. I was a mess. Anyways, and so, so moving forward, and then like around, I would say 2011 is when I really started to hone in on things. And I was like, okay, a lot of shit's happened, and I've never really played the victim. That's not really who I've been. I've not really been that victim type person, or so I thought, until I really started digging in and really doing the good core work. Okay, now the work itself is going to be easily taught to you. It's what you do with it though. I'm going to suggest books. I'm going to suggest seminars. I'm going to suggest all sorts of things throughout this training. Okay, that has brought me to this center of peace. So yes, anyway, so I started a nightclub, and what happened? I got in a huge blow up with my mother, and I leave. Let's just leave it at that. I'm like, okay, I can't take this shit anymore. So I leave. I moved to Kelowna, British Columbia. Super happy. Me and my kids. I legit like walked away from everything. I had toys. I had an executive house on the golf course. I had, you know, the Cadillacs, the bikes, the quads, you name it, a nightclub. Like, I just was like, bye. I'm over it. Like, I can't deal with you people. They're just like energy suckers, right? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, get rid of those people. I'm going to show you how to do that as well in a really nice manner. If you don't want to actually exit them completely from your life, I'm going to show you a whole bunch of techniques as we go through this. So next thing, okay. So I moved to Kelowna. I start hanging out with some friends of mine that are in like the southern east tip of British Columbia. Okay, and so it's a mountain town. It's in the Rocky Mountains, and I was going to open a pub. And so I actually moved my kids and I into a large home with a couple extra bedrooms because I had a couple business partners, one of which was going to move in with me. The other room was going to be for my nanny. So I'm paying this huge amount of rent, and I move here, and I run me. So I'm in a town of like 3,000 people. That's it. So there's not a ton of work necessarily for me, and there's definitely no childcare. So I was completely screwed. Like, completely. It was absolutely ridiculous. I had no friends, no family, all of which, but it's no big deal now because everything happened for a reason. But in that moment, I had no friends, not no friends, but no, you know, I didn't have the people that I was hanging out with quite closely for the year, right, leading up to, because those happened to be my business partners. But I had no friends, I had no family, really, because I didn't want to talk to any of those people either. And I was in this big house, I had no income, I had no job, and I had kids that were pissed off that we moved. So it was awful. So for 3 weeks, I legit got up in the morning, cried myself back for a nap. It was bad. I was in really rough shape. So from there, I kind of was like, okay, like you've gone through enough self-development to pull you out of this. Like get your shit together. So, and I couldn't. And I was like, no, these fucking people, this person, this person, and this person wronged me. And I know I'm feeling like a victim. And I know that it's making everything worse and moving everything into a cycle. But fuck them. I'm pissed off and I'm going to feel miserable about it. Seriously. I had those conscious thoughts. So anyways, I woke up one night and it was in the middle of the night. I mean, obviously I was sleeping like shit because I was fucking vibrating all the time. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I was like, girl, what do you want? Not how you gonna get it, da, 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 that sort of shit. Just what do you want? And so I was like, oh, I remember when I was pregnant with my daughter, Liv, when I started to get really kind of awakened, I wanted to move to Central America for many, many reasons. Either the Nicoya Peninsula area of Costa Rica or San Juan del Sur. Something about that area that's kind of always called to me. So anyways, that was what I focused on. And I was like, oh, out like a light. I woke up in the morning and my now mentor's pretty little ginger face popped into my head and I was like, oh my God, Erin. So I reached out to Erin and the rest is history. So yeah, you know, that's my story. Since then, I've managed to start a team, an organization. I think I've got like 65 people right now. And I'm proud of every single one of them. I mean, they're all on their own journeys, which is fantastic, but I'm super pumped to be able to offer them mentorship as well as get them out of a 9-to-5. So that being said, I'm going to leave this as my story. I'm going to stop for the sake of time, and we're going to head back. We're going to head into some amazing training that's going to show you guys how to work with your warm market and really how to communicate with friends and family. That's the biggest thing, not just in business, but just how to communicate effectively. And even if they're worth fucking communicating about. Okay? Anyways, peace.